I'm 71 years old now, and for the last 34 years, I've carried a message that wasn't meant for me. It was meant for all of us. In the summer of 1991, a Quinault elder named Thomas Clearwater took me deep into the Olympic Peninsula rainforest and introduced me to something that shouldn't exist, something ancient, something watching. Its name, translated roughly from the old language Thomas spoke, meant the one who remembers. And what it told me about humanity, about what we've become and what's coming, has haunted every day of my waking life since. My name is Dr. Peter Langford. I was an anthropologist. I say was because after that night in 1991, I could never practice my profession the same way again. How do you study human cultures when you've learned that another intelligence has been studying us for thousands of years? How do you write academic papers about folklore when you've looked into the eyes of the folklore itself and seen something that looked back with pity? This is my account. Every word is true, and I'm telling it now because the warning I received 34 years ago is no longer about the future. It's about right now. I first met Thomas Clearwater in March 1991. I was 37, an associate professor at the University of Washington, specializing in Pacific Northwest indigenous oral traditions. My research focused on what academics dismissively called creature narratives, the stories tribes told about beings in the forests that weren't quite human. Sasquatch, Tismequez, Stick Indians, oh ma. Every tribe had different names, different stories, but the consistency across unconnected cultures fascinated me. These weren't just campfire tales. They were warnings, protocols, sacred knowledge about something real that lived in the deep places. Most of my colleagues thought I was wasting my career. Bigfoot studies wasn't exactly a path to tenure, but I wasn't trying to prove Bigfoot existed. I was trying to understand why so many cultures across thousands of years spoke of the same thing. Thomas Clearwater found me through my published work. He sent a handwritten letter to my university office. No return address, just a postmark from the Quinault Reservation. Dr. Langford, I read your paper on Tismequez oral traditions. You got most of it wrong, but you asked the right questions. If you want real answers, come to Quinault. Ask for Thomas Clearwater at the general store in Amanda Park. Come alone. Tell no one. Some things are not meant for academic papers. I almost threw the letter away. I'd received crank mail before, people who claimed to have seen Bigfoot, people who wanted me to validate their blurry photographs, people who thought I was part of some cover-up. But something about Thomas's letter was different. There was no excitement in it, no eagerness to share a story. If anything, it read like reluctance, like he was doing something he didn't want to do but felt he had to. I drove to Amanda Park on a rainy Saturday in early April. The general store was a small wooden building that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. When I asked for Thomas Clearwater, the woman behind the counter studied me for a long moment before picking up an old rotary phone. 20 minutes later, a battered pickup truck pulled into the lot. The man who stepped out was in his 70s, with long gray hair braided down his back and a face that looked carved from old wood. He wore a flannel shirt, work boots, and an expression that gave nothing away. Dr. Langford, Mr. Clearwater, thank you for... Don't thank me yet. He looked me up and down, assessing something I couldn't identify. You came alone? As you asked. You told anyone about my letter? No. He nodded slowly. Get in the truck. We're going to talk, and then I'm going to decide if you're worth the risk. Thomas drove us to his cabin, a small structure set back from a logging road, surrounded by old-growth forest so dense it felt like twilight even at midday. Inside, the cabin was sparse but warm. A wood stove, a small kitchen, shelves lined with books in English, and what I recognized as Quinault language texts. He made coffee in silence, handed me a cup, and sat across from me at a rough wooden table. Why do you study them? He asked. The beings in the forest. What do you want? To understand, to document the oral traditions before they're lost. Document. He said the word like it tasted sour. You want to write papers, get published, advance your career. That's part of it, I admitted, but I also genuinely believe these stories are important. They're consistent across too many cultures to be pure invention. And what do you think they are? These stories? I hesitated. Honestly, I think they're based on something real, some species we haven't cataloged, a relic hominid maybe, something that's managed to avoid detection because it's intelligent enough to do so. Thomas watched me for a long moment. Then he laughed, a short, humorless sound. A relic hominid, you scientists. Always trying to fit things into your categories. He shook his head. What if I told you they're not hiding from us? What if I told you they're waiting? Waiting for what? That's the question, isn't it? Thomas stood and walked to the window, looking out at the forest. My grandmother was a keeper of the old knowledge, her grandmother before her. For generations, my family has maintained a relationship with the ones who live in the deep forest. We call them Tsiatko, the wild people. Your word Bigfoot is a joke to them, like calling the ocean wet stuff. You're saying your family has had contact with them? Ongoing contact? Not contact, understanding. There's a difference. He turned back to me. They don't want contact with humans, not anymore, but they watch, they remember, and sometimes when they choose, they communicate. With your family. With keepers, people who have earned enough trust over generations to receive messages. Thomas's expression grew heavy. I'm the last keeper in my family. My children moved to Seattle. My grandchildren don't speak the old language. When I die, the connection dies with me. And that's why you contacted me? I contacted you because they told me to. The words hung in the air between us. Outside, wind moved through the trees, a sound like breathing. They told you, I repeated slowly. 3 months ago, the first direct communication in 11 years. They said a man was asking questions, a man who wrote about the old stories with respect, even if he didn't understand them. They said I should find this man. That the warning needed to pass beyond our people now. What warning? Thomas didn't answer immediately. He returned to the table, sat down heavily, and wrapped his hands around his coffee cup as if drawing warmth from it. I'm going to tell you a story, Dr. Langford. Not an academic story. Not something for your papers. A story about what I saw when I was 19 years old and what I've understood ever since. And then, if you're willing, I'm going to take you to meet them. Meet them. The Tsiatko, the wild people, the ones who remember. Thomas's eyes met mine, and I saw something in them that made my academic skepticism feel very small. They have something to tell you, something they've been waiting to tell your kind for a very long time. Thomas's story took 3 hours to tell. He had been 19 in 1939. The country was still crawling out of the Depression, and life on the reservation was hard, harder than most Americans could imagine. Thomas had grown up hearing his grandmother's stories about the forest people, but like many young men, he'd begun to doubt. The modern world was creeping in. Radio, automobiles, the promise of progress. The old stories seemed like relics of a superstitious past. One night in August, his grandmother woke him before dawn. It's time, she said. They're calling. She led him into the forest along paths he'd never seen, despite growing up in those woods. They walked for hours, climbing higher into the mountains, into territory that felt increasingly wrong. Not dangerous exactly, but other. The trees were older here. The silence was deeper. Even the air tasted different. Just before sunset, they reached a clearing, and there, standing at the tree line, was something Thomas had told himself didn't exist. It was 8 feet tall, maybe more, Thomas told me, his voice distant with memory. Covered in dark hair, almost black. But the face was what I couldn't look away from. It wasn't an animal's face. It wasn't human either. It was something else. Something that had been watching humans since before we had a word for human. His grandmother had approached the creature without fear, speaking in a dialect Thomas barely recognized, older than the Quinault language he knew, something that seemed to come from a different era entirely. The creature had listened, responded in low vocalizations, and then turned its attention to Thomas. It looked at me for what felt like an hour, Thomas said. And I knew without words, that it was measuring me, judging whether I was worthy of what my grandmother carried. The knowledge, the responsibility. The creature had reached out and touched Thomas's forehead with one massive hand. And in that moment, Thomas said, he understood things that couldn't be explained in any human language. They've been here longer than us, far longer. They were here when the first humans crossed into this land. They watched us spread across the continent. They saw what we did to the land, to each other, to everything we touched. And they made a choice to step back, to hide, to wait. Wait for what? Thomas's expression was unreadable. That's what they want to tell you. I spent 6 months earning Thomas's trust. I visited the reservation every weekend, helping him with chores, learning fragments of the old language, listening to stories that would never appear in any academic journal. I told no one about our arrangement. My colleagues thought I'd become obsessed with fieldwork. My department chair expressed concern about my lack of publication productivity. None of it mattered. I knew I was on the edge of something that would change everything I understood about the world. In October 1991, Thomas decided I was ready. "Tomorrow night," he told me during one of our evening conversations. "The moon is right. I've sent word. They've agreed to see you." "How do you send word?" Thomas smiled slightly. "There are ways, old ways. Your science wouldn't understand them, so don't ask." He gave me instructions. Wear natural fibers, nothing synthetic. Bring no electronics, no cameras, no recording devices, no weapons. Eat nothing after noon. And most importantly, show no fear. "Fear's disrespect," Thomas said. "They can smell it on you. If you're afraid, they'll know you're not ready and will never get another chance." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my motel room in Amanda Park, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I was about to experience. Was this real? Was Thomas delusional? Was I? But underneath the doubt was something else, a certainty I couldn't explain. A sense that my entire life had been leading to this moment. We left at dusk the next evening. Thomas drove us to a trailhead I didn't recognize, miles from any marked path. We hiked in silence as darkness fell, Thomas navigating by landmarks invisible to me. The forest grew denser, older. The trees here were ancient, Douglas firs and western red cedars that had been standing since before Columbus. After 2 hours, Thomas stopped. "From here, we go slowly. Quietly. They're watching us already. They've been watching since we entered the forest." I felt it then. A prickle on the back of my neck, the sensation of being observed by something I couldn't see. We continued for another hour, climbing steadily. The moon rose, casting silver light through the canopy, and then, without warning, we emerged into a clearing. It wasn't natural. The trees had been moved somehow, arranged in a circle around an open space maybe 50 feet across. The ground was covered in soft moss. And at the far edge of the clearing, half hidden in shadow, stood 3 figures. My heart stopped. They were massive. The largest was at least 8 feet tall, with shoulders broader than any human's. Their bodies were covered in thick hair, ranging from dark brown to an almost reddish hue. But it was their faces that held me frozen. They were watching me with eyes that reflected the moonlight, eyes that held an intelligence I'd never seen in any animal. Thomas spoke softly in that ancient dialect. One of the creatures responded, a low, complex vocalization that seemed to resonate in my chest. "They know who you are," Thomas translated. "They've been watching you for 2 years, since you started asking the right questions." "Watching me?" My voice came out as a whisper. "They watch everyone who gets close to the truth. Most turn away, get scared, give up. You didn't." Thomas paused, listening to more vocalizations. "They want to know why." I tried to organize my thoughts. Why had I pursued this? What drove me? "Because the stories matter," I finally said. "Because something real is behind them. Because I believe there's knowledge that's been lost or hidden, and recovering it might be important," Thomas translated. The creatures conferred among themselves, sounds that ranged from deep rumbles to higher clicking noises. Then the largest one stepped forward into the moonlight. My breath caught. Its face was ancient. There's no other word. It carried an age that had nothing to do with individual years. This was a being that belonged to a lineage older than anything I'd studied, older than human civilization, old enough to have watched our entire history unfold like a single season. It spoke directly to me then, not in words I could understand, but the meaning somehow translated itself through Thomas's quiet voice. We are the Tsiatko. The first people called us the keepers of balance. We were here before your kind walked upright. We watched you learn to speak, to make tools, to build. We were proud. For a time. The creature paused and something like sorrow crossed its features. Then we watched you forget. What followed was the most profound experience of my life. Over the next 4 hours, standing in that clearing under the moon, I received a history lesson that exists in no textbook, no academic journal, no human record. The Tsiatko, the beings we call Sasquatch or Bigfoot, are not animals. They are not some missing link or relic hominid. They are something far older and far more aware than our science can comprehend. According to what they told me that night, they were part of an earlier experiment, not by humans, by whatever forces shaped life on this planet. They were designed, if that word has meaning, to maintain balance, to keep the ecosystem stable, to ensure that no single species dominated to the point of destruction. For millions of years, they succeeded. Then, humans appeared. We watched you with hope at first, Thomas translated. You were creative, inventive. You had a spark that other species lacked. We thought you might become partners, fellow keepers. But something went wrong. You changed. Somewhere in your development, a disconnection occurred. You began to see yourselves as separate from the earth instead of part of it. You forgot that everything is connected. And once that forgetting took hold, it spread like a sickness through your kind. The Tsiatko had debated among themselves for thousands of years about what to do. Some wanted to intervene, to guide humans back to balance. Others argued for separation, for withdrawal into the deep places where humans couldn't follow. The separatists won. We retreated, watched from distances, hoped you would remember on your own, but you didn't. The forgetting grew worse. And now, the creature stopped. Its eyes met mine, and I felt something I can only describe as overwhelming sadness. Now you are approaching a threshold, a point from which there is no return. Your kind is about to make a choice you don't even know you're making, that will determine whether you survive as a species or become another failed experiment. Another extinction. What choice? I asked. What threshold? The warming, Thomas translated. The poison in the air and water, the dying of species, the way you treat each other with increasing cruelty. All of these are symptoms of the same sickness, the forgetting, and the sickness is reaching its final stage. Can it be stopped? The creature made a sound that might have been a sigh. We don't know. We have watched many species rise and fall. Most destroy themselves before they reach this point. You have come further than most, developed more than most, but you have also caused more damage than most. The balance hangs by a thread. Why are you telling me this? What can I do? Nothing alone. No single human can change what's coming, but the message needs to spread. Humans need to understand what they've forgotten, what they're losing, what they'll become if they don't remember. And if we do remember, if enough people understand, then there is hope. Faint but real. The Tsiatko have not given up entirely. We still watch. We still wait. But our waiting is almost over. What do you mean? The creature looked at me for a long moment. Then it said something that has haunted me every day since. If your kind crosses the threshold, we will leave. Not hide, leave. This world will no longer be compatible with our purpose. And when we leave, the last chance for balance goes with us. You will be alone, truly alone, on a dying world with no keeper to remember what it was supposed to be. I returned from that clearing a different man. The drive back to Seattle the next morning felt like traveling between worlds. Traffic, billboards, shopping malls, gas stations, all of it seemed absurd now. Meaningless noise generated by a species that had forgotten something fundamental about its existence. I tried to return to my academic work. I couldn't. How could I write papers about creature narratives when I'd stood face to face with the creatures themselves? How could I reduce what I'd experienced to citations and peer review? I took a leave of absence from the university, then another. Eventually, I stopped pretending I'd go back. Thomas and I stayed in contact over the following years. He was the only person who understood what I carried, the only one I could talk to without sounding insane. We met regularly, sometimes at his cabin, sometimes in the forest. Occasionally, the Tsiatko would appear at the edge of our conversations, watching from the shadows, never approaching as directly as they had that first night. "You've delivered the message," Thomas explained. "Now they wait to see what you do with it." What could I do? I was one person, a former academic with a story no one would believe. I tried writing a book, abandoned it after 3 chapters. Who would publish it? Who would read it without dismissing it as fantasy? I gave lectures at small venues, UFO conferences, cryptozoology gatherings, places where people were already predisposed to believe in the unexplained. But even there, my message got lost. People wanted exciting stories about Bigfoot sightings. They wanted evidence, photographs, hair samples. They didn't want to hear about ancient keepers of balance and warnings about human extinction. "You're trying to communicate in their language," Thomas told me once. "But this message isn't about evidence and proof. It's about awakening, remembering. That requires a different approach." "What approach?" "I don't know. That's your task to figure out. The Tsiatko gave you the message. How you spread it is up to you." Thomas died in 2003. Cancer. He refused treatment, saying he'd lived long enough and the forest would take care of what remained. I was with him at the end, in his cabin, surrounded by the trees he'd spent his life protecting. His last words to me were in the old language, a blessing, I think, though I never learned enough to translate it fully. After his death, I became the sole human keeper of the Tsiatko's trust, a responsibility I'd never asked for and didn't feel worthy of. I continued visiting the Olympic Peninsula, hiking the trails Thomas had shown me, occasionally glimpsing movement in the shadows that might have been wildlife and might have been something else. They never approached me directly again, but I knew they were watching. I could feel it. The years passed. The world changed, and not in the ways that Tsiatko had hoped. I watched the news with growing dread. Climate reports getting worse each year, species going extinct at unprecedented rates, political divisions deepening, wars fought over resources, everything the creatures had warned about, accelerating faster than even they had predicted. In 2015, I had a dream. I don't usually remember dreams, but this one was vivid beyond anything I'd experienced since that night in 1991. I was back in the clearing, surrounded by Tsiatko, not 3 this time, but dozens. They stood in a circle, facing outward, as if preparing to leave. One of them turned to look at me. It was the elder, the one who had spoken to me 24 years earlier. "The threshold approaches," it said, and this time I understood without translation. "Your kind is running out of time. The message must spread further. You must try again." "I've tried. No one listens." "Then find new ways. The old keeper is gone. The responsibility falls to you alone now. Do not fail, for all our sakes." I woke up shaking. Outside my window, the first light of dawn was breaking, and I knew with certainty that bypassed all rational thought that the dream had been real, a communication across whatever barrier separates our world from theirs. I spent the next several years trying to honor that instruction. I wrote articles for environmental publications, framing the message in terms modern readers might accept. I spoke at sustainability conferences. I joined organizations working on climate change, species preservation, ecological restoration. None of it felt like enough. The message the Tsiatko had given me was too big for pamphlets and policy papers. It required something more, a fundamental shift in how humans understood their place in the world. But how do you change a worldview that's been dominant for centuries? How do you help a species remember something it spent thousands of years forgetting? I don't have those answers. I never have. What I have is the message itself, the warning. And now, at 71, watching the world accelerate toward exactly the threshold the Tsiatko predicted, I've decided to share everything, not in academic papers, not in conference presentations, just the raw truth of what I experienced and what I was told. Because time is running out. The creatures who have watched humanity since our beginning are preparing to give up on us. And once they leave, once the last keepers of balance withdraw from a world that's forgotten what balance means, we'll be alone with the consequences of everything we've done. There's one more thing I need to tell you. In 2019, I made one final trip to the Olympic Peninsula. I was 65 then, my health starting to fail, and I wanted to visit the places Thomas had shown me one last time. I hiked to the clearing where I'd received the message. It took me twice as long as it had in 1991, and I had to rest frequently. But I made it. The clearing was still there, unchanged after 28 years, the ring of ancient trees, the carpet of moss, the feeling of being watched. I sat in the center of the clearing and spoke aloud, hoping they could hear me. "I've tried," I said. "I've spent my life trying to spread your message. But I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if anything will be enough." The forest was silent. No response came. "If you're leaving, if you've already decided it's hopeless, I understand. We've given you every reason to give up on us. But some of us are trying. Some of us remember, even if we don't have words for what we remember. Please don't abandon us entirely. Please give us a little more time." Still silence. I sat there until darkness fell, until the cold seeped into my bones, until I could barely see the path back to my car. Then, just as I was about to leave, I felt something. A presence behind me. Close. Closer than they'd ever been since that first night. I turned slowly. One of them stood at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the darkness. Not the elder. This one was younger, smaller. Its eyes reflected the faint starlight. It didn't speak, but it reached out one massive hand and placed it over its chest. Then it extended that hand toward me, palm up, offering something invisible, and I understood. Hope. Despite everything, despite the darkness closing in and the threshold approaching, they still held onto hope. They were giving some of that hope to me. "Thank you," I whispered. The creature nodded once, a gesture I recognized from Thomas's stories, a gesture of acknowledgement and respect, and then it was gone, vanished into the forest without a sound. I'm telling this story now because I'm running out of time. My doctors give me a year, maybe less. Pancreatic cancer, the same thing that took Thomas. I have no family to leave this knowledge to, no successor to carry the responsibility forward. So I'm putting it here, in words, hoping that someone who needs to hear it will find it. The beings we call Bigfoot are real. They are ancient beyond our understanding, intelligent beyond our measurement, and they have watched humanity since before we were fully human. They were keepers of balance in a world that has forgotten what balance means. They gave us a warning almost 34 years ago. Humanity is approaching a threshold, a point of no return. The disconnection that began millennia ago, the forgetting that separated us from the natural world, is reaching its terminal stage. If we don't remember what we've forgotten, if we don't change course, we will destroy ourselves and everything around us. The Tisiatko don't know if we can change. They've watched too many species fail, but they haven't given up entirely. Not yet. That moment in the clearing in 2019 proved that. We still have time. Not much, but some. What they want us to remember isn't complicated. It's something every indigenous culture once knew, something encoded in the stories we've dismissed as primitive myth. We are not separate from the world. We are part of it. Every action we take ripples outward, affecting everything else. The illusion of separation, the belief that we can exploit without consequence, consume without limit, destroy without destroying ourselves, is the sickness that's killing us. The cure is remembering, reconnecting, seeing ourselves as what we actually are, one species among millions, sharing a planet that belongs to no one and everyone. I know how this sounds. I know most people will dismiss it as the ramblings of an old man who spent too long chasing myths. I've made peace with that. But if even one person reads this and feels something, a flicker of recognition, a memory of something their soul knows even if their mind has forgotten, then it will have been worth writing. The ones who remember are watching. They haven't left yet. Let's give them a reason to stay. Dr. Peter Langford passed away on March 3rd, 2025. This account was found among his papers with instructions that it be shared as widely as possible. Whether you believe it or not is up to you, but the warning it contains about disconnection, destruction, and the urgent need to remember what we've forgotten speaks for itself. The Tisyatko, if they exist, are still waiting. The question is, what are we going to do about it?